Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Brendan. I'm the cultural representative of Metropolitan Aboriginal Land Council, and our role as Aboriginal Land Council under the Land Rights Act, we are the guardians and custodians of land, water and air. The land we're gathered on here today is Gadigal land. Gadigal is one of 29 clans which make up the Eora Nation. The word Eora actually means men's country in Gadigal language. Not far from here at the Conservatory of Music is actually built on Bora sacred dancing ground for men, kangaroo and dog dreaming. In Gadigal, as I said, Gadigal is one of the 29 clans which make up the Eora Nation, and the boundaries for the Eora Nation start from the ocean, and they're surrounded by almost three of Australia's beautiful rivers. I say almost because where I come from traditionally, you can't get a better river than that, which is the Barker or the Darling River. So the three rivers that embrace Eora Nation are the Hawkesbury River, the Nepean River and the Georges River. And in between those three mighty and beautiful rivers, we've got 29 clans which make up the Eora Nation, and the name of the clan that we're gathered on here today is Gadigal. So on behalf of myself, on behalf of Metropolitan Aboriginal Land Council and its members, I'd like to welcome everyone here this afternoon. It's always an honour and a privilege for me to perform a welcome to country. 10 years ago in Australia, we would never have had a welcome to country or an acknowledgement of country. And I know for a fact 10 years ago you would never have had a welcome to country performed by such a good-looking bloke as myself. My connection to country, my personal connection to country, I was born at Surrey Hills, at Crown Street Women's Hospital. And from that hospital I was taken away from my mother. I'd never seen her again. I found I'm one of 10 siblings. All of us have been removed. And I'm the second generation of my family that's been taken as well, along with all my cousins and aunties and uncles. So I've lived here my whole life, considered Sydney, or more or less forced to adopt Sydney as home. One of the things that we ask each other as Aboriginal people is who's your mob and where you're from? And for a long time I couldn't answer that question. And I've had a lot of fun with identity. I grew up in a time where the colour of your skin almost dictated who you were and where you were from. And a few examples was I'd lived in Marrickville for a while, and the old Maltese blokes would walk past swinging their prayer beads and come up and start talking to me in their language, and I'd say, I don't know what you're saying. They'd say, we thought you come from Malta. And then I lived in Newtown for a while, and the Greek community in Newtown were doing the same thing to me, trying to claim me and said, well, you look like you come from Cyprus. And that's happened my whole life. I remember getting a train as a young fella and someone yelling out, "Go home, you old." And I grew up not black enough to play with the black kids and not white enough to play with the white kids. So I copped it from both sides of the fence, and I gave it back both sides of the fence as well. And the fun stuff I've had with ignorance and identity is one day I thought if I grew a big black beard and bought a big gold cross and robbed a bank, the description of the bank robber would be Middle Eastern European. And I could run around the corner, go home, have a shave and get away with it. I never did rob the bank. I did think about it, but seriously. And that's my connection to country. And rivers, I'm very passionate when it comes to our waters. Again, having come from the Darling River or the Barker, I'm sure most of us in this room are aware of the state of that river at the moment. And, Sydney Harbour, even the harbours. I remember as a kid I'd go and throw a hand line in that harbour and bring home a meal. You wouldn't catch me fishing in that ocean now and eating the fish out of there. So for me it's a passionate thing. Water. Without water we don't live. We don't survive. We can live without cotton. We can live without almonds. Can't live without water. But I'll leave that conversation for other brothers and sisters, and I'd like to pay my respects to any elders, past, present and emerging, and my Indigenous brothers and sisters in the room here today. And I'd like to extend that respect to my non-Indigenous brothers and sisters as well in the room. The only thing that's different between us and you is our language, and that's it. So thank you for having me. Welcome to Gadigal land. Always an honour, and enjoy the rest of your day. I was going to say, I'm just going to hand it over to you, and you are now going to do an interpretive dance of everything I've just said.
I wish. I feel like everyone's probably a bit tired of my introductions, which is, has been much the same from session to session. And as I said a moment ago, so many of the faces in the audience here at the moment is familiar, which is so beautiful because it's really important to us that you kind of join us for the full entirety of the symposium. But for those of you who may not know me, I'm Leah. I'm the Curator of Programs and Learning at the Biennale of Sydney. And before I sort of reframe our final session together, I too would like to acknowledge the many different places that we come from and travel through in our arrival to this place, Gadigal land. And I acknowledge the traditional custodians of land, sea and sky country, the Gadigal people and elders past, present and emerging, and extend my warmest acknowledgement and thank you to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends joining us here today. So we are in our final session, and as we've sort of mentioned earlier, conceptually we are travelling down the river as we move through river conversations, and now we land in the river's mouth. And I can't help but think of my first conversation with Anne Paulina, who really sort of shifted the way that I thought about the notion of the river mouth. And also we've spoken a lot about rivers being acknowledged as having legal rights or, personhood. But Anne, in few words had me sort of rethink the limitations of having to acknowledge a river as a person to be able to connect with and to have sort of equity in our relationships with nature, and rather Anne used the term ancestral being, which I really loved and has stuck with me. And we are very lucky today to hear from Anne, but a whole bunch of speakers who will be sort of situated within the Rivermouth section of today's third River Conversation Symposium sessions. I would like to sort of just ground us back in the questions that have really shaped the development of River Conversations, as I think it's important to reflect on these as we hear from diverse caretakers, knowledge holders, activists in our final session together. So the questions that have really guided our thinking in imagining or bringing into being river conversations has been, what does it mean to give voice to the river? How can we communicate with rather than for the river? How can we acknowledge rivers as ancestral beings? And what are the social, environmental and legal implications of providing a river legal personhood? Which we had a beautiful question about that in our earlier session a moment ago. It's not a very easy one to answer. So just a quick introduction to this session, which will then be extended upon from my dear friend and colleague, Alessandro Pelizzon. I also too would quickly just like to acknowledge that it's been such a joy to create River Conversations with Alessandro, who comes to us from Southern Cross University, and Erin O'Donnell from the University of Melbourne. They've taught me so much, and also through their connections to communities all over Australia. But I think what's really special about this session is that it's really grounded in intergenerational voice from across Australia, commencing up north in WA with a Matawarra trio of voices, including Edward Mulligan, Hoseas Clare and Anne Paulina, travelling down to the Burrung in Naarm with the Burrung Council, and landing with Dee Harding, a descendant of the Bidjigal, Gungaloo and Garrangbal people of up north in Queensland. They are an artist or a participant here in the exhibition, and I strongly encourage you to go down and experience their incredible mural, which has beautiful connections back to country, which they will speak a little bit more of in their closing session. But D draws upon and maintains the spiritual and philosophical sensibilities of their cultural inheritances within the framework of contemporary art internationally. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Alessandro Pelizzon.
I think I don't need that microphone. I think this is working, I imagine. So thank you, Leah, and thank you for organizing and making this possible. I think for those of you who have participated in the 3 sessions, they were intended to flow into each other. They were intended to be connected and part of a long journey using the metaphor of the river. And so if I can actually continue on what Erin did this morning, I'll read a little passage that will try and contextualize this final session. The journey thus far will have taken the participants away from the relatively novel idea of rivers as mere objects in the river source session yesterday, and into the new realm of rivers as veritable environmental persons in the river tributary session this morning. It is now time to journey toward the river mouth. As rivers are the veins of the land, so they connect to the heart, the ocean. They deliver nutrients and pollution. They connect and disconnect the long journeys of eel and fish as they migrate from headwaters to breeding grounds, far out in the open sea. Therefore, in moving toward the end of the journey, we ask a possibly even more provocative question. Can rivers be more than just environmental persons? To many Indigenous peoples in the world, the answer is already very much in the affirmative. Rivers in Australia, in the Amazons, in New Zealand, as well in the ancestral memory of many European countries, are ancestors to be revered and carefully listened to. And thus, in concluding the journey along the imaginary and physical river, we invite participants to ask the question of how we listen to the voices of the rivers themselves. Rivers have been speaking to us and to each other since time immemorial. As rivers join the ocean, they become part of a global conversation, a chorus of river voices speaking together. How do we learn to hear the rivers speaking? How can we facilitate their communications with us and with each other? As Leah mentioned, this session will have 3 groups of speakers, wonderful groups of speakers, beginning with representative of the Marwara Fitzroy River Council. And we have Edwin Mulligan and Jose Clay here, and remotely via Zoom, Dr. Anne Polina. And Dr. Anne Polina is an Ngina Warawa woman and an active Indigenous community leader, a human and earth right advocate, a filmmaker, and a respected academic researcher with I'll always have to list them. She has a Master of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, a Master of Education, a Master of Arts, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Health Science. And I believe she is now undertaking a 2nd Doctor of Philosophy. The second session will allow us to hear from the members of the Birrarung Council. The Birrarung Council was appointed by the government in August 2018, as prescribed by the Yarra River Protection Act of 2017, to be the independent voice of the Yarra River as a living entity, and to provide independent advice to the government on the implementation of the Act. Traditional owners have a permanent voice through the Act's requirement that at least 2 members of the Birrarung Council must be nominated from the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation. And we have here with us 2 Wurundjeri members and 4 members of the Birrarung Council, Uncle Dave Wandin, Kelly Thomas, Warwick Leeson, Alex Lee, and Erin O'Donnell. The final session, as Leah mentioned, will bring to us, albeit still remotely, Dee Harding. Dee works in a wide variety of media to explore the visual and social languages of their communities as cultural continuum. A descendant of the Bidjara, Gangulu, and Garamal peoples, they draw upon and maintain the spiritual and physical sensibilities of their cultural inheritances within the framework of contemporary art internationally. Harding uses techniques such as stenciling to perform the same techniques as their ancestors, revealing complex and layered cultural heritage and aesthetic histories. So you can see that we will have 3 fantastic sessions flowing into each other and punctuated by videos and by readings that will complete the readings of pieces of legal initiatives that have emerged throughout the planet, giving and granting rivers legal personhood and the status of living entities. So if you have any questions, Can I invite you just to hold them until we have the final question and answer session at the end, unless it's a very burning question or comment that you really feel that needs to be shared at that particular point. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Jose Clay and Edwin Mulligan. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. You guys from the back can actually hear me? Oh, that's good. We're from the Fishery River Madawara Council. The Fishery River, it's nearly 500 kilometers long, and within the distance, there's you've got the Nyigana people, Kuni and the Bonova, and you got Buan Majiri and Wongajunga. My fathers, they're all Walmajiri people, they're all desert people. They came in the early 1800s to be able to help the Europeans to build their nation. My mothers, they're all Nyigana people from river country, so I'm partly Walmajiri Nyigana. I've been involved in a lot of art projects, even had the chance to work with people such as Anne Polina, and scientists, geologists, anthropologists. We take them country. We do surveying with many different, with Kimberley Aboriginal Cultural Center, KLC. Most of my time working with them, I just volunteered. I've been doing that for about over 18 years. And most of my time, I didn't want to get paid for it because I felt that there was a need for me to work with my elders. From my understanding, my elders come first. When an elder look at me, they would tell me in my language, my father's language, they would say, meaning you're just a green grass, and the grass needs water. And they say water plays a very significant role within our kin group system that links us to the physical elements of creation and also the spiritual elements of things that cannot be seen. Sometimes I feel that I don't know if people understand about spirituality. Well, that's one of the first lessons you outsiders need to understand. Maybe not to understand, but just, well, people can believe whatever they want to believe, but it just, hopefully they'll probably appreciate what we're saying to them. I've been in a lot of ceremonies. I don't have any master degrees. I'm not a rocket scientist, but to let you guys know that English is my fourth language. Third, actually. Up in the Kimberley, we rather speak Creole. Creole is like a combination with your own language mixed with English. And we call that language broken English. It's like you broke it up into many bits and pieces, but yet it's a language. And it's been around from, I think, my father's time. My father was born and bred in the station. And I think they're the first mob who came up with Creole. My generation, I was born in the 80s. We were born after the land rights movement. They called my generation the year of the Barangaroo. And I have a birthmark that proves that story. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time, when I was within my mother's womb, my father took my mom hunting, fishing, and my father told her, I'll leave you at dinner camp near the riverbank. I myself will go by foot. See what I can catch. I'll come back when the sun goes down. So he went for a long day's walk. The sun was setting. So he turned around without no kangaroo meat, without no goanna meat, and without no snake meat. But from a distance, he seen my mom pulling on a line. With that joy and excitement, he ran over there to help, to assist. So both of them started pulling on this barramundi. Pulling on this lure. And then out jumped this barramundi. But somehow they knew it was an unusual way of catching that fish. The indigenous people, we always reading animal behaviors. It's just the way we are. Anyway, took the fish back home, told the story, and they shared that meat. 9 months later, my mom gave birth to me, and she was looking for my birthmark, but somehow she knew where to look. opened my mouth, pulled out my tongue, and there was his birthmark. And people within my community, they believe it is because the hook went through that mother that fish had determined my birthmark. So basically, I see that fish, the barramundi, as a birthmark representative. And when in my indigenous community, I see myself as a fish with all the other, as a fish in a pond with all the other animal and heritage in that particular environment. When I'm in my community, I feel that I'm swimming like a fish. There's a vibration there, a ripple effect. And when I'm in places like Broome, like when I'm in places like Fitzroy Crossing, a little small country town called Derby, I see places like that. I see places like I'm a fish that swims within the pond. But when I'm in places like Broome, Perth, or any other Australian capital cities in Australia, I see places like that as Australian mainstream. I'm that fish that swims within the current. And when I want to deal with my indigenous problems, I turn my islands into a fishlands just to see the situation through. Yeah, it's, and then they call that story Toro, the English word called Toro. That story, we call them Jarang Bungula Mara. It's like when you are conceived from your mother's womb, our mother goes through a process for 9 months just dreaming, and things happen for her. And then they sit and talk and discuss about dreams, a certain dream from certain locations. They say, what Melda taught me, what we know, but I'm 42 years old, from my understanding, I'm just going to sum it up for you more. It's, from my understanding, it's like, they say the spirit of the land, the protectors and the guardians, Mungo Randi, Ray Randi, they see in the coming of a newborn child, they, the spirit of the land, the protectors and the guardians, had to summon a particular animal as an offering of sacrifice. And according to the way that the mother and the father and the members of the family had eaten that meat, accordingly, the spirit of the land, the protectors and the guardians, take notice of that. And by taking notice of that, they celebrate. And part of the celebration, they had to suck up the energy flow from the surrounding environment to be able to create that personality, characteristics, and also give that baby a gift. You might be twins, but you are still unique. That's what they say. And they say the moral behind the story about the hook that went to the mother of the fish had determined my birthmark. They say my generation will be saying a lot of things under one sun. They say our tongue is like a knife that cuts through butter. Either you can heal or destroy people just by talking to them. It's a vibration, it's like a ripple effect. And stories like this are very sensitive. Well, it's easy for me to say that because I feel I have enough confidence that I could be able to take people out on country. I do have cultural tours that actually take people out for a walk for an hour and also 2 days. And you're looking at about 430 kilometers within 5 language nations. Not only I'm creating my own jobs, but I'm creating jobs within my community for the tribal groups and also the clan groups. Because I put my elders first, and my elders tell me what to do, and I listen. It's a totally different outlook into perspective in how we look at life, physically and spiritually. And we do sing and dance country, and we've been doing that from who knows when. Sandy said that we've been here for 40,000 years, 60,000 years, according to our stories. But my elder told me we've been here from the beginning of time. The dreaming, it's an English term word. And I'm talking to some of my elders, even including my father and some of my spiritual advisors, according to kin groups. I don't know if you guys know anything about kin groups. That's another subject that you guys need to appreciate. There are stories that we want to share with you more. And I'm one of the first generations where I feel that my generation are like a businessman-oriented people. We speak our own language, Creole, such language, and also English. And Yeah, the dreaming. I don't know if you guys know anything about the dreaming. That's another subject. My understanding, the dreaming is like, well, my father's language, Walmajari, which is Ngaragane Jagai. Ngaragane is like, it's been created for a purpose, the making of a particular purpose. I'm that purpose. Put it this way, okay. My name is Edwin Lee Mulligan. Edwin from England, Lee from China, Mulligan from Ireland. But my indigenous name is Wara Lambade Kandawara Balajare. It's about a flower near a stream of water under a shady tree. But there's a moral behind the story that kind of guides me through my life and what I do. He leads me, he guides me, and he protects me. From A to B and everything in between. Having a moment of silence, having a moment like this is part of Ngaragane, had given me the opportunity to share something that is something that belongs to us, that also could be shared and appreciated by others. Okay. 1 more minute? 1 minute. Okay. I've gone for this time when there were Bush people. They had this story about continuation from the past, the present, and into the future with celebration. Meaning, every day is a gift. And when you have that gift, you need to appreciate the gift. And there's also another little saying we say, meaning at the end of the day, when the sun goes down, before you go to sleep, try to be able to have a steady heartbeat, knowing that you did enough for yourself. Meaning you got to appreciate yourself and appreciate humanity. Doesn't matter what you went through. These are the stories that were told to us from our senior elders, our cultural advisors, our spiritual advisors. Spiritual advisors that can be able to speak to the birds and the bees and the grass and the trees, even the air that we breathe. And I've been out on country so many times, not only with non-indigenous people, but with our travel groups doing introduction to country, publicly, and also men business. And as far as I'm concerned, in my life, in this point in time now, it is very important. Water plays a very important role. And there's a lot of things that can be shared just for a particular audience to come to a point to realization or maybe appreciation. Yeah, now I reckon I can talk all day here. That's the reason why I got myself involved in tourism. I've got my own tour, cultural tours. And, I worked in courts as an interpreter for young juvenile offenders, getting in trouble. But with this life experience, part of my Ngaragani, my life experience, from where I came from, where I met, and how I'm going to continue on with another day as a gift to appreciate and to move on with celebration, not only for myself, but with others too. Mrarajanga. That's a concept. We have many concepts. Water can teach you that concept. Water, ngaba, we say ngaba. Ngaba is not only water that you drink. They say water can actually teach you a lot. It's part of cleansing too also. And it's a thing that can be shared, and sharing, we say, when we share things, sharing is like, we share things like water, not like cupcakes that you want to sell. It's water, that's a human body. We need water. It is essential. And as water, there's a certain way of drinking water. my desert people, my father's side, when they used to drink water, they said, they used to call my desert people, the Walmir people, they used to call them, the kangaroo eating grass people. And I was like, what's that mean? And they said, you have to go to that location. The storage will be given to you there. I was only 28, and I was like, man, I never been around country, especially desert country. Down the Canning Stock route a place, well, 46, a place called Kaningara. I went out there for the first time in my life. I went out, and I just realized, yes, my father's people, they were like kangaroo eating grass people. They used to mimic kangaroos. What kangaroo eat, they eat the same thing. How kangaroo drink water, they used to drink the same way the kangaroo used to drink. Just to preserve water. They used to dig for about 8 feet, wait for 3 hours for the water to rise, one handful, and bram up again for 2 to 3 days later to drink another share, one handful. That's how they used to live back in those days. They say my generation, like, we actually give away like water. Yeah. But anyway, that's, sorry.
Thank you. Yesterday we had to talk about who's going to go first. I said, I'm going to feed off your energy, Dad. My name is Jose Claire. I'm originally from Fitzroy Crossing as well. I think he already explained where that place is. That's what the river looks like. That's me with a guitar and my 2 little brothers, just sitting on a tree, just enjoying the peace. My traditional name is Biraligi. It comes from an elder from a clan group that sort of grew me up. And it's more of a spiritual connection to our culture. It's like the totem. He was talking about the totem earlier. We call it jaring. When you're in your mother's guts, you get this. Your mother will experience something through that whole pregnancy, and that will represent you as you developing inside your mother's tummy. He already explained that part. Fitzroy is a beautiful place. It's open, as you can see, as far as I can see. And my connection to the river is so deep that words can't explain it enough. But I do listen to the river. The river do speak to me. It speaks to all of us. How? I got told when I was a kid that sometimes you have to listen with your eyes and look with your ears. Some things just can't speak back to you. That's that skill that people have when they can't speak. They do hand sign and stuff. Same thing. The trees can't speak, but we can understand the purpose, the resource that it gives us. That living off the land and survival is one thing that we had to learn and had to know growing up. And it goes like this. Seasons are there to follow. We've been taught this growing up. Because there's seasons where fruit are ripe. They're ripe. Fruit's growing. There's times where there's no fruit at all. There's animals that we can hunt, but at that same time there's animals that we can't hunt because it's not healthy to eat at that time of the year. So for an example, the goanna, the wet season, we can hunt them, we can catch them. They're out, they're feeding, they're fat, they good to eat. Anyways, the same time the goanna is fat and ready to eat, you can't eat the turkeys and the kangaroos because they carry the worm, from the wet season. That's one thing that I always find interesting, that this world that we live in now, everything are being farmed and treated and injected. Everything are ripe all time of the year. Those are the stuff that we try to keep away from. We like to follow the season. And the river is a resource for that. Without that water, there's no fish, there's no, crocodiles, there's no goanna. All these things become extinct. And we don't want that. That's why we traveled here, to represent and talk on behalf of the river. Sometimes I have to look back on this photo to remind me who I am, what I'm here for. See, we have a lot of issues in our communities, cities, everywhere, and it all comes from our health and our lifestyle. This river is a cure for us, especially. We rely on it. We depend on it a lot, and we are lacking a lot of education and a lot of health, like a lot of independency, There's a lot of bad stuff like influence, like drugs and alcohol and cigarettes and all this stuff going on in our communities. Without this, it's only gonna just increase and just blow up our town, our communities really faster. Why I'm saying this is because we all live in a world where we are distracted by other things, And we was talking about earlier, who speaks for river, Yeah, we do speak for river. River speaks for itself. But without the people that's listening and the people that are being involved with the voices of the river, there's going to be no changes. And we are under a threat back home, This beautiful thing that we have, that we depend on, just being so close to being threatened, and which means we're being threatened, We have a deep culture, a really deep connection to land, water, mud, sand, And these people the government want to, make a lot of money. It's understandable. Money is good. You can buy and do a lot of stuff with it, but it's not gonna fill your heart with love. Because the moment it's gone, you become bankrupt and everybody forget about you. But we always have land. We always have country. We always have that connection. Like how I do right now, I feel like the boy tree is me. When I talk, I have to stand. I have to feel like I'm rooted on this ground, That's where all my strength from. I'm an artist. I like to paint landscape, I like to be creative. Even sometimes I'm that good at being creative that I get to, people around me to do what I want them to do without telling them, like listening, or laughing. So, yeah, I think I'm gonna just finish this off with saying, I miss my family, I miss home, I miss the river, and when I get back, I'm gonna try to cuddle everything, but while I can, I hope that in the next 10 years or 5 years at least, the river still looks the same. Right now, it's Saturday, my family are down the river, fishing, hunting, cooking on the fire, and just living a healthy, happy lifestyle, That's one of the reasons why I am here, because this lifestyle that I grew up, I want to see my young people grow up and see the same thing. I want you to be able to go there and experience it, Some people are vegetarian, you might not like the way we kill and cut stuff up, but just experience that lifestyle because it's true and it's happening right now, you know? Everything we've been talking for all day, all these great points and, you know, questions and answers about the river is actually happening right now, you know, as we speak. So, yeah, I hope we can like all have that same connection of water. It doesn't have to be the river where I grew up in, just water, fresh water. Without that, then we're going to be paying for it. So I don't want to go on too far. I feel like I have to take a step. Thank you for all being here and having the time to listen to us and the previous speakers. I feel the respect in this room because it's quiet. And I hope to keep coming back to Sydney and doing things like this because it's good. It's way out of my society back home. You know, it's really different. And experience like this builds us, makes us stronger, and make us better, you know? And yeah, I hope to come back soon, share more stories. And I'm an artist as well, everybody. It's Jose Claire, that's my name. Search it up on the internet. I have to promote myself before I stop talking. Yeah, everybody else have a good day. Thank you. I would like to introduce Anne.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you can hear me. Is that correct?
Anne, see you.
Yo. Okay. Mabubara. Ngajina nilawa lan pelina ngayo imadwara manen. Ngai mandajara nyigana ngai nganga in Jugan and Yaru country. Ngayo mabungorinyan nganga Parramatta, Georges River, Nepean River, and most of all, the river keepers, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. What I've been hearing today in tuning in has been amazing. What we're talking about are rivers of life. When I introduced myself, I said, Ngayu Imadwaramanan, which means that I am a woman who belongs to the Fitzroy River. So the river owns me. So I'm duty bound to protect this river for the rest of my life. And as you can see, we have younger leaders standing up also doing that. So I want to recognise the Parramatta River, the Nepean River, the Georges River, and importantly, thank Brendan for his welcome to country and the Gadigal people and the Eora Nation, because on this land, there is a law from the beginning of time called First Law. The laws that taught us as Indigenous people how to live with nature, how to be part of nature, how to be the voice of nature. And so what we're saying is we live in an amazing place called the Kimberley, and the Fitzroy River or the Muttawarra is a National Heritage listed river that belongs to all of us. Every person sitting in that room is a shareholder of this amazing river system. It is 700 kilometres long. It is also the largest Aboriginal cultural heritage site in Western Australia. So what we're looking at is not only do we need to recognise, because we do, we know that the river is a living being. When I, all the accolades that Alessandro read out, I have completed a second PhD, but for me, the wisest people in the world that I know cannot read and write English. When I'm with my elders on country, what they say to me is sit on the ground and be humble because you've got nowhere else to fall. What we're dealing with is complexity and we need collective wisdom. We need to recognise and acknowledge that Australia has the oldest living cultures in the world. We were the first everything. the first scientist, the first archaeologist, the first anthropologist, the first eugenicist, most importantly, the first water holders, and we cared for a water industry that coexisted with us from the beginning of time. So we share our stories. It's all about story. It's all about songlines. It's all about recognizing that we are being asked a question from rivers, not only in our nation, but across the world. What are the human beings doing? What are we doing as a species when we look across the earth? Why have we, as the judge said earlier, Justice Mid-Afra Kamat, he said we have to challenge ourselves. We have to think again, what is wisdom? Most importantly, what we see is climate chaos and climate change just getting out of control. Because why? We need to come to a point in this world where we need to create peace with Indigenous people and with nature. This is the greatest challenge that we face across the planet. Rivers are the arteries of life. They are the veins that connect us through everything. I live near the mouth of the river. I live on the Fitzroy River. And the rivers have been asking us for quite some time and sharing with us that everything is place-based. You need to form your own relationship with living water, with the rivers around you. We as Indigenous people, we want to share with you how you can feel country, how you can hear country, how you can hear the rivers talking to you. It will communicate with you once you start to develop a relationship with it. So wherever you are across this nation, you must start to create peace with the living water systems that are around you. And as I said, one of the questions that we hear was the bravery of iwi in New Zealand to come up with personhood. But when I came back and I sat on the riverbank and I said to my elders, oh, in New Zealand, they're creating the story that rivers are personhood. They looked at me as if I was crazy and they said, "You're not a human being." And so we have been pushing the boundary with people like Erin and Alessandro and Liz McPherson and Kirsty and so many brave Australians who are saying, how do we get a change in legal pluralism to recognise rivers as ancestral beings? We know as Indigenous people right across this nation and across the planet, we dance with our rivers, we sing with our rivers, we cry with our rivers, we talk with our rivers, we have ceremony. So we know it is an ancestral being. And so what we're saying is that it's time to really think about how we form this relationship with rivers wherever we are. So when we come at a time where so much of the world is out of control and chaos and uncertainty, we need to find those people who believe in this story, who want to be awakened in their spirit, as Edwin says, who want to sit by the riverbanks, whether it's the Barker, whether it's in Northern Australia on the other side of the coast, whether it's in the Parramatta. We have to form a relationship with these living systems in order to hear it, in order to feel it. And so what we're challenged with now as human beings is how can we come together and create peace and harmony with our river systems? It was raised a little earlier that Australia was recognised as having a peace prize with the treaty story. It is so difficult for not only Indigenous people, but fellow Australians to understand that what we're talking about is how can we have peace when we continue to have invasive, colonial, unjust development that is destroying river systems across the globe. So we need to find a way to come together. We need collective wisdom. We need the wisdom of Indigenous people. We need to create a way that we can come together in our regions to look at the preciousness of rivers of life. And so what I believe is that there is policy within Australia. We know the laws are failing in terms at every level of environment. We live in a crazy state called Western Australia, where we have created laws that allow the willful destruction of our sacred sites. So what we're saying is that it's time for citizens across the globe, across this nation, to come together, to find a unity pathway of how we work together to create peace amongst each other, non-Indigenous and Indigenous. We say to our fellow Australians that this land belongs to you as well. Your DNA is embedded in this landscape. We know that you can feel this country because you are a part of it. And so what we challenge you to do is get to know where you are, get to feel your country, get to hear your country, get to listen to the rivers, the wind, and all the things that can give you the story of saying where we need to go as a nation. We know that Indigenous people have lived for thousands and thousands of years in this country through a time frame of harmony, of a reciprocal economy. And we are working very, very hard in the Kimberley, particularly along the Muddawarra, to create what we're calling regeneration hubs. So we are working with our young leaders, we are lifting them up, we are building their spirits, we are creating a workforce of keeping the river healthy and wise and clever and still with us, so that we can dream, as Edwin says, we can dream not just for now, but we can continue to dream the past, the present, and the future into this moment in time. So there are many brave people that are working across the land. And one of the things I want to say is not only do we need to have critical legal scholars, but we need to have those justices, such as the justice that was speaking a little earlier. We need everyone to be brave, because if we're going to save Mother Earth, then we're going to have to save the rivers of life. And if we don't do this, then the earth will be lonely without the vibration of human beings, because the earth will right-size itself without us. And what we're saying is that in order to move forward, we have to build a spirit of humility and a spirit of cooperation. And we need to find those people who we can wrap around us to transform not just legal systems, but the economic systems. So what we're saying to our fellow Australians in my closing is, get to feel your land. This is your country too. Indigenous people have opened our arms, our spirit, our lives, and we're saying, we want you now to feel this law of obligation, the first law, the law of the land, to stand and hold the rivers of life wherever you are in this moment in time. Kalio Mabu, thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing with us today. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just introducing it. Yep. What a powerful way to pause and reflect now. Instead of me reading something, we're now going to have a short film, which is Wurundjeri Woiwurrung elders speaking on the floor of the Victorian Parliament when the Birrarung legislation was passed. This was the first time that it had ever happened. It was the first time that Woiwurrung language was spoken on the floor of the Victorian Parliament. So we'll bring up this video. Enjoy.
On behalf of all members, can I extend a very warm welcome to all of our Wurundjeri elders onto the floor of the chamber. I now invite Wurundjeri elder Auntie Alice Kalasa to address the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We would like to pay our respects to our ancestors, elders past and present, Aboriginal community present here today, and acknowledge all members of Parliament as well as the general public. To everyone present, we say, Wominjeka, Wurundjeri Balak, Yemen Kundibik, welcome to our country. Today we gather proudly on this historic occasion, not only for us, the Woiwurrung people, but for all Victorian Aboriginal clans and the state of Victoria. Today, a bill comes before the House to protect and recognise the uniqueness of the Birrarung. In our language, Woiwurrung, this bill is called Willip Gin Birrarung Maron, which means keep the Birrarung alive. The Birrarung has been central to our cultural, spiritual, social and economic well-being since the dreaming. Our ancestors and the Birrarung shaped one another, living in balance together for countless generations. The state now recognises something that we, as the first people, have always known, that the Birrarung is one integrated living entity. When passed, this bill will guarantee that the Birrarung will be protected by law and benefit from the custodianship of a body known as the Birrarung Council. As the First Nations people, our place in this new governance structure is also enshrined into law. Through this process, the state has recognised the Woiwurrung as the first people of the Birrarung. The journey of achieving this type of structural inclusion has been hard won. It commenced from the moment of first contact and was the Yayokan Dan Liwagal, the dream of our ancestors. In the early 1840s, as the devastating consequences of settlement became apparent, our Nurungata brothers, Billy Baleri and Bebejan, requested land for the Woiwurrung from the Aboriginal protector. They wanted to settle permanently along the Birrarung. They were unsuccessful, but a seed was sown. Later their sons, also Nurungatas, Simon Wonga and William Barrack, petitioned this parliament for land ownership and economic freedom. In 1863, their advocacy resulted in the establishment of Corranderk Mission Station on the banks of the Birrarung near what is now Hillsville. Sadly, the introduction of the 1886 Half-Caste Act, passed into law by this Parliament, led to the ultimate destruction of Corranderk and other missions. This Act is understood to have been in response to the 1881 Parliamentary Corranderk Inquiry, which marked the only occasion in the history of 19th century Victoria, when an official commission was appointed to address Aboriginal peoples, calls for land and self-determination. It is on their shoulders and that of countless others that we stand here today to walk along a shared path of recognition, rights, repatriation and reconciliation. We would like to acknowledge the state for the inclusion of our language in the preamble to this bill. This is a first in this state's history. It is also an important achievement for our community. As a direct consequence of European settlement, Woiwurrung has dormant for generations. This is recognition of language revival. These are clearly milestones to be proud of in a year that is already rich in milestones and anniversaries for Aboriginal Australia. There is a sense of change, a sense that we understand our shared past, are more committed to moving forward together in unity. We hope that further partnerships can enable First Nations from across Victoria to truly affect the decisions and policies which impact their country. To you, who share in the country of the Birrarung and the life it gives to all of us, we share with you our obligation to keep it thriving. Willip Gin Birrarung Maron, keep the Birrarung alive. Thank you all.
Before moving on, thank you, Auntie Alice Kalasa. I acknowledge in the gallery the presence of a former member of this place, the current Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Councillor Robert Doyle. I now invite Wurundjeri Elder Uncle Colin Hunter Jr. and Wurundjeri Elder Ron Jones to address the House.
Warong Balik Barbirong, Waningenu Big Bill. Yari Arabil, Mani Big Barburong, Gambu Maram Nanganu. Mani Birong Murunjak, Durpa Murum Wangu, Nanganung Twapu, Burong Wa, Napu, Willem Nanganu.
We, the Wurrung, the first people, and the Burrung belong to this country. This country and the Burrung are part of us. The Burrung is alive, has a heart, a spirit, a part of our dreaming. We have lived with and known the Burrung ever since the beginning.
Thank you, Uncle Colin Hunter and Ron Jones. I now invite Wurundjeri Elder Artie Gale Smith and Wurundjeri Elder Auntie Alice Kalasa to address the House.
Nambu, Nanga, Nangi, Minu, Mangi Bedarang, Banjul, Mugan Big, Wuru, Wuru, Warren, Ba, Yalak, Ba, Nagunan Tuan, Biku, Kulan, Mugan, Banjul, Wa, Manakik, Nanyan.
We will always know the Burrung, Banjul, the great eagle, the creator spirit, made the land, the sky, the sea, the rivers, flora and fauna, the law. He made Kulin from the earth. Banjul gave Wa, the crow, the responsibility of protector.
Thank you, Auntie Gale Smith and Auntie Alice Kalasa. I now invite Wurundjeri Elder Alan Wandon and Wurundjeri Elder Jackie Wandon to address the House.
Beliang, Banam Binyu, Punjalal, Pagruk, Mungan, Nagu, Nanayu, Nanbu, Nilumbik, Nilumkulun, Balatbik, Balatkulun, Daliat Ma, Nanayin, Mani, Bik, Ba, Birung, Ba, Nambu, Maranjak.
Bunjul's brother, Paliang, the bat, created Bagaruk from water. Since our beginning, it has been known that we have an obligation to keep the Burrung alive and healthy for all generations to come.
On behalf of all members, I'd like to thank you very much for coming in today to present those messages to us. I'd ask now the House to pause while the Sergeant-at-Arms escorts our guests from the House.
That remains one of the most powerful videos that I like to show my students regularly. The language and the words that were spoken by the elders are the preamble to the Birrung legislation, which formally recognises in settler state law something that the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung have always known, that the Birrung is a living, integrated, natural entity. And with that, I would like to invite the members of the Birrung Council who are here with us today, Alex Lee, if you can come up to the stage, Warwick Leeson, and Kelly Thomas. Kelly is a Wurundjeri woman and she is joining us to give physical presence of Wurundjeri here with us today. We're also going to have Uncle Dave Wandon, who I hope has turned his video on. How are we doing? Nope, not yet. Excellent. So while we wait for Uncle Dave to officially join us, I'm actually going to start with Kelly And I'm going to say apologies in advance because Kelly thought she was going to come after Uncle Dave, but you get to go first. So I think you can speak into your mic.
Okay, thank you. That was quite emotional for me to see that, my beautiful Wurundjeri family. So I'm a proud Wurundjeri woman that lives on Gadigal land here in Sydney. Water's everything to me, and I wanted to share a story that just makes me quite emotional. I've been home for 2 years, and it is very, very powerful. So I had an interesting upbringing, but I was brought up in Melbourne, and my culture, we weren't allowed to live our culture freely and comfortably. So I took a journey overseas. I lived in Europe. I studied flowers and floristry, and because I knew it felt spiritually right. And Corrandirk was, when it was a living, beautiful, sustainable place for Wurundjeri people to grow. And William Barrick, my great-grandfather, they became great farmers and weavers, and I've often wondered why I was so driven to be a florist. But getting to now me culturally connected with my spirit and my family and my ancestors, it's only about 8 years ago, I was able to perform ceremony, which of coming to age and my naming ceremony. This took place in the back of Healesville with the most incredible Badgerys Creek. I was also getting my daughter to have her naming ceremony as well. She couldn't come into age because she was only 8. I had to wait 36 years for this connection to country, which I'd always felt, but we were having ceremony. So it was a woman's beautiful weekend. I get out of the car and I see this river, Badgerys River, and I could feel every ancestor before me. I could feel what they did there. They you know, it was just the most beautiful place. I walked around because I was kind of embarrassed, like now I just wanted to burst into tears. And I sat down on that bank and I had to touch that water. And I could feel everybody that had been there before me. So we have this weekend of ceremony. I get my first possum skin. I have ceremony. And my Auntie Di, which is Auntie Di Kerr, is my only living relative. But when she cloaks up and when ceremony is performed, it's a completely different thing. And with this ceremony, she says that you now live the law and you must look after this land, the waterways, the earth, be responsible for everyone. And those words ran deep within me. So we're after this, we have this beautiful ceremony. Everybody gets their acknowledgement and whatever. We go down to the river and all the elder girls start washing down the babies in the river. And I'm nervous at one part because my little girl's still, 8, and I'm thinking she's going to slip. And they're washing, and again, this spirit comes in me. I can feel it. They're cleansing them. They're doing something that had been going on for thousands and thousands of years. This same ceremony is performed in this place. And I'm like, this was the most magical time of my life. There's actually a movie, I think they've done a documentation about it, but that's another story. But I can feel it, and I can feel the spirit. And I didn't want to wash anything off because this was the first time that I'd had, been ochred, with the ochre and everything was on me for the first time. But Arnie comes down and she's doing not so well in that time. She asks somebody to get a coolant and she washes my face. And it's the most beautiful thing because it's like, she goes, okay, you can keep the rest, but this is what we need to do for you. And funnily enough, being, modern day, I've got my mobile phone. I drop it into our creek, into our waterways. I run a business here, flowers industry. I'm like, holy heck, my phone, can you believe it? Get it out, and it works. It goes down, the girls are running after it, it's gone for like 2 minutes, mobile phone, gone. I'm like, oh no. And it worked all the way until I got home to put it in some rice and to fix it up, but it kept working. I was like, I feel like this was magic. So water for me is everything. My culture is everything. And from that ceremony, and always have naturally felt that I've been connected to nature and land and the waterways, is, it's the law. I have to do it. I want to do it. I want you all to do it. I want us to all share this, come together collectively, because we want a future. I want to know that in 50, 500 years' time, that ceremony that I was blessed to have can happen for future generations. I really do. I really, really do. Is he ready?
He is. Thank you so much, Kelly. It is now a great pleasure to welcome Uncle Dave Wandon.
Hey, Uncle.
Good afternoon, Kelly.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly, for stepping in while I had some technical issues. My name is Uncle Dave Wandon. I'm an elder at the Barangaroo Council. Been sitting and listening to what was happening before, especially when my elders had the opportunity to present in Parliament for the first time since 1881. One of my ancestors, William Barrack, also approached the House and asked for land for his people. I'm sitting on that land that he asked for. I am sitting on Corrandirk. I've been down on the Yarra River today, healing the river. I'm privileged by the elders that you heard speak in Parliament who said, who's going to take over this role? And I've been recently elected to take that responsibility that I can pass on to my children and my grandchildren. But I do take the responsibility seriously that what William Barrack said in 1881 and what my elders have taught me through my 60 years of life, who said to me that one day, learn what you can from this land, because one day, just like William Barrack, we will be showing the country how we can care for country, not us just as Aboriginal people, but we will show you, the non-Aboriginal people. And there is no black and white. If you choose to call any place home, you need to take the wisdom of the people of the land, and you need to convert that wisdom to the way that we have to live in the present and into the future. But listen to Anne Paulina, who I think I will be repeating. And I've only met Anne a couple of times, but we have the same vision. We have the same outlook. We have the same future for us as Indigenous people. But without our rivers, without the lands that support our rivers, there is no way that we can survive. But we have survived for many, many thousands of years, as everybody knows. We are the oldest living culture on earth. There are older cultures, but they're not around anymore. Australia is an absolute demonstration of the way that humans need to interact with their country, to accept the laws of the land that are passed down from our ancestors. And I pay my respects to my ancestors and my elders, both past and present, but also some that are emerging. I started teaching my son when he was about 20 years of age, when he was ready to learn. We get together very often. And I find that looking in the world that he lives in and listening to how he lives in it, that I learn from him. My message to all of you here, it is not returning back to the Indigenous ways exclusively. It is only by walking country together talking country together, that we can learn to heal country together. I thought it was beautiful what Anne said about understanding the law of the land. We have our creator, and in Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, our creator is a male. I'm not talking about gender bias or anything like that, but that's the way that we have lived. But the one law that Bunjil gave us, the male, our creator spirit, he said, you must not forget, you must respect your physical mother, the first person that you come in contact with when you are born, even though you might grow with inside her for 9 months, when you're out into the wide world. She is the first person that nurtures you. She's the first person that feeds you. And as you grow up, she cries with you when you are sad. She laughs with you when you are happy. She shelters you. She looks after you when you are sick. She finds the appropriate medicines or the appropriate person that can give you those medicines. She provides shelter, clothing, warmth, teaches you how to cool down. And that brings us to the rivers. If it is extremely hot, you can always dangle your feet in the water. You don't have to swim in it, but you know that by putting your feet in the water, that you will cool down. She'll teach you where to go, where not to go. She'll tell you what's right and she'll tell you what's wrong. And although in the community, there will be many other people that would give you laws, rules, regulations, and it could be from your own family, your extended family. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it is done by the government, whether it be council, state or federal, and indeed, these days, global. But you will never forget your mother, your physical mother. And you must remember, as Bunjil taught us, do not forget the spirit of your mother also. And for us, the spirit of our mother is the land on which we work, live and play. And if you cannot understand what the spirit of our mother provides, where our physical mother collected the materials to look after us when we were young, if you cannot learn from that you can go out and collect those resources to care for our physical mother as she grows older and is not able to fend for herself, then you have failed as an Aboriginal person. But remember what our physical mother did. And you can return that by learning from the land that you have done the right thing by community and you've done the right thing by country. It is only by understanding country and everything and our responsibilities within it, which we learn from our mothers and our aunties and our uncles, and our grandparents and our elders, that you understand how you can actually fit into your community. Because if you cannot understand the community of the land, and it is not just people, it is the water, it is the land, it is the insects, it is the birds, and it's the bees. It's the trees, it's the shrubs, and it's the grasses. It's the reptiles, it's the animals, it's the worms and the ants. And this is what we, as Aboriginal people, lost for quite a few years due to colonisation. But we are relearning it. You can't learn it from books. Science will. And I have nothing against science whatsoever, because it is only by taking the modern methods of recording what happens on the land, what happens in our waters, that we can learn how the devastation that has happened to our waterways, that we can reverse it. But if science doesn't start to consider, let's look at how the Indigenous people managed this land for so long, over 60,000 years, 70,000 years, scientifically proven We know we have been here longer. I'm here on the Barangaroo. I can speak to the Barangaroo. I have a creation story passed down to me about how the Barangaroo was formed, which tells us I've been here through my ancestors longer than anybody science can record, where they watched the birth of the Yarra River. And that is why the Yarra River is so special to us. We're not worried about the geological science, although geological science is backing us up on what we know. We have continued, despite all the restrictions placed upon us, to look after our lands and after our waters. We have watched people make mistakes. We have advised. We have protested. We have collaborated with those who agree with us that the land is degrading. The rivers are degrading. As Anne said, there are many people who work with us, not necessarily influential at the higher levels of government. They are normally friends, local farmers, who come and talk to us and say, how come your land is better than my land? I have a debt to the people who provide the chemicals and provide the grasses and the machinery that I can go in there and I'm supposed to get X amount out of my land. What people don't understand is that they haven't listened to the land. You have to listen to the land. You have to walk the land to understand it. You have to listen to the people that were there before you. And over the last 200 years, it's not always Aboriginal people. But for us, if you listen to us, we think of the water as our mother. We think of the land as our mother. The land is the physical, it's the muscle, it's the skin, it's the eyes, it's the ears, it's the nose, it's the mouth. But the river itself, we think about it as our arteries, as our capillaries, our veins, that it is a cycle that goes through. And what you put into that river that flows downstream into our neighbours, the Bunurong people, and goes out to Port Phillip Bay and eventually out into the ocean. That becomes the heart of the world. Science has been telling us all for 50 or so years that the oceans are important. But Indigenous people have always known this, although the ocean is not our responsibility. That belongs to other Indigenous communities out there on those islands, out there on the coastal fringes of the continents as we know them today. But it's always been our responsibility under Bunjil's law that what we put into the river will flow onto somebody else. And in caring for country, in caring for your own house, as most people think today rather than country, that what you dispose of out of your household will go on to someone else's country, and you must make sure that it is as clean as possible so that they don't have to deal with the problem. And that's the way that we look at the rivers and the way we always looked at our waterways and our land. Our land cleans the rain that comes down, that feeds into our rivers, that eventually goes out to the ocean and then is then pumped back up into the atmosphere and returned to us. And if we don't care for it properly, it will not be returned to us healthy, and we will see the decline of our rivers. This is something that Indigenous people, and I've met quite a few from around the world, understood, and practice to do the best possible. It is time to reverse the processes of how we look at the world rather than a global economy. It needs to be looked at as a global ecology. Because if we abuse the spirit of our mother, just as we all know when we were growing up, if we ever did anything wrong, it wasn't always Dad. He might yell at you, he might smack you, but it was the mum who always gave you the rules, who always told you the difference between right and wrong. You could always fool your dad. You could never fool your mother. And I think we all need to step back and say, Mother Earth, we cannot fool her anymore. She will continue to punish us if we do the wrong thing. We cannot hide. We cannot joke. We must take our mother seriously, both physically and spiritually. If we don't, we are heading for a climate catastrophe. We are heading for climate change. This is nothing new to Aboriginal people. We have gone through 3 climate changes in the known history of Aboriginal people in Australia. What we did we extract resources because it's harder and harder to live? No, we learned to adapt. We adapted to the ecology. We didn't invest more money to say we need to do other things so that we can survive. We learned to read country. We didn't read it from books. We learned from our elders. If you want to know where our knowledge is, it is not in books, but it is written down. It is in the land. Learn to read country, walk country, heal country. And together we can all call ourselves humans with the right responsibility. Waminjika, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Uncle Dave. It is a pleasure and a privilege for all of us to serve on the Birrarung Council. Me, Alex, Warwick and Uncle Dave, along with other members back in Melbourne. You'll see these beautiful photos of the Birrarung, which are cycling through. We are the voice of the Birrarung, together, collectively. And I'm handing over to Warwick now to give us a very brief history of how this legislation came to be.
What do you mean brief? Thank you very much. This has been absolutely incredible. I guess there's nobody in this room who hasn't had great experience with community engagement. It will be through committees. Sorry? It'll be through committees. It'll be through friends groups, whatever. My address this afternoon is not going to be a personal story like all the others. Mine is, I'm afraid, at the risk of sounding a little boring, all the hard-nosed political reality about how you actually achieve things. My name is Warwick Leeson. As well as being on the Birrarung Council, I'm chair of the Yarra Riverkeeper Association, and I'd just like to stop and acknowledge that Charlotte Sterrett is the riverkeeper who's travelled all the way from Melbourne to be with you. Great to have you along, Charlotte. Back in 2004, there were a group of people who were concerned about the miserable health of the Yarra River and the fact that it was being treated with disrespect overall. And we, the group then, and I wasn't part of it at that stage, took a holistic view of the whole 272 kilometres? 242. We must have cut out a couple of corners since. 242 kilometres of the Yarra, broken into the 3 different reaches. There were many groups that had been concerned about their little backyard pockets of the Yarra River, and I don't say that disparagingly, but they didn't look at it holistically. So in 2004, a group of people came together. In 2006, they'd been able to achieve funding from Melbourne Water to get an aluminium runabout, and became in 2006 the first water-based river patrol. And that opened up a whole new vista of things. Not only did it enable the Yarra Riverkeeper of the day to be able to go out on the water and see some of the challenges as well as the beauty of the Yarra River, but it also was a marvellous advocacy tool. Jump forward, and we had a lot of successes along the way. We had been able to pressure to get sounder environmental flows, to get better planning regulations, to do a whole range of things. But jump forward to 2014 when there was a state election. That stage, and we are strictly non-political, but credit where it's due has to be acknowledged. At that stage, there was a coalition government, and we, as an organisation, I was well and truly part of it by then, approached most of the members of Parliament in Victoria to come out on the boat, to learn about the Yarra River, to learn about a whole range of things. And we put forward a two-part program that we wanted. One was to have the planning control for the whole of the Yarra undertaken by a single body instead of, as it was at that stage, by individual councils in terms of setbacks from the river, etc., etc. And the second one was to have a continuous ribbon right down that corridor so that it became a parkland and a habitat corridor. So that was the simple message that we put forward. We got, sadly to say, we got bugger all in the way of interest from the coalition government. The then Labor opposition, and Brian T was the shadow opposition planning minister, was really keen on it. The first question that they asked was, how much will this cost if they do this? And we explained to them it was only going to be loose change. What this was about was principle. What this was about was integrity. What this about was proper recognition for the Yarra River. And to their credit, they came on board, and they came on board in spades. And as a result of that, the Yarra Riverkeeper Association activism got us to the first stage where we got an election promise from the Labor Party that if elected they would implement the Yarra River Protection Act, which they subsequently did. But from that came in 2017. In the meantime, once the election had taken place, we had to make sure that they actually honoured it in full, not just in dribs and drabs and cut bits out of it, as frequently happens. So the Riverkeeper Association, in conjunction with Environmental Justice Australia, worked really hard to keep the pressure up on the government. What we hadn't asked for as a Riverkeeper Association was anything to do with the traditional owners. We were only concerned about the river. To the government's credit, they recognised, far better than we did, they recognised the link between the ownership of the Indigenous people there, the Woiwurrung specifically, though the Bunurong have a little bit down near the mouth of the river, but the Woiwurrung overall, they recognised, the government recognised that and embraced that as part of this holistic thing, which Erin referred to when she said it was the first time that either in the title or in the text that the Woiwurrung language was recognised, and that was really important. And I think it was a wake-up call for the Riverkeeper Association. We realised that it isn't just a matter of saying, well, this is ribbon of water and a bit of bush on either side that we wanted to protect. It's much more than that. I guess we focused to keep it simple, because if you make it too complex, then you start to lose people. But I think that the legislation that we've got, and I don't know whether you want to sort of cover that with Alex later on, because you did tell me be short, the legislation is absolutely terrific. The fact that the Wurundjeri are guaranteed seats on that Burrung Council. The Burrung Council, of course, is set up as the oversighting body, the body that reports directly to the Minister. And we hold the state government, the local councils, statutory authorities and all the stakeholders along the way accountable in the sense that we can go straight to the Minister and say, you got the Act and these people are not following the principles of the Act. And earlier on, I think it might have been Brendan that talked about songline trees. And we are fighting at the moment with North East Link in Melbourne about the protection of a 400-year-old songline tree. All right, well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you. Okay.
Warwick, and it's a privilege to have someone who was part of this process from its inception to see the legislation today, which is Australia's first piece of place-based legislation to recognise the river as a living entity. It's not a legal person. That's a really important distinction, and it's something that we've talked a lot about over the last couple of days. And we've often used those terms interchangeably about a legal person, a living entity. There are really important distinctions, and one of those is that a legal person can, of course, go to court. A legal person can sue. A legal person can hold property. So a legal person looks a lot more like a corporation. A living entity, which is what the Yarra is, the Birrarung, it's much more about the relationship. And that's been really profoundly important. In many parts of the world where we've seen rivers and other natural entities recognised as legal persons, there's been a backlash because people have seen that new power and they've become afraid. They've seen the potential for that power to be weaponised against them. Now, sometimes that's important, and I don't want to underplay that, because sometimes you need a weapon to say, well, actually, we're going to hold you to account in a court of law. But the power of not entering into that adversarial relationship is that you get to change the conversation. And this is what's happening on the Birrarung. The Birrarung provides 70% of Melbourne's drinking water supplies. It still operates as a stormwater drain. It's still there providing services to human beings. And historically, what settler colonial people like me have asked of the river is, what can we take from it? What can we extract from the river? How much can we ask it to do for us? What we are now starting to see under this legislation, there is a 50-year community vision that says, what do we want for the river? And because the river is a living entity, we're asking the question, how do we get there with the river? And the river becomes a collaborator in its own management. And that's the change in the conversation that is really profound and important. And on that, I'm going to hand over to Alex.
Thanks, Erin. Feels really humbling to be here today, and particularly after hearing Uncle Dave speak. We get to hear him talk quite often at the Birrarung Council, and it never ceases to make me speechless. He has an incredible way of getting us to think about our place and our role with the river, and I think I certainly value that amongst all the other discussions that we have on the Birrarung Council. I've sat through these 3 sessions and I've attended all of the exhibitions at the Biennale in the past 5 days. My head is exploding. There's been a lot of repetition of themes, which I think is really great. It means we're all on the same page, and collectively as communities we can bring these ideas forward to, help look after our rivers and take them into the future. Some of the key themes have really been around language, education and time. One of the things that we had a chat before we came on stage today, and we talked about, how we break up, this enormous task that we're taken on as the Birrarung Council. And one of the things that I had been asked to talk about is the fact that the river has its own voice, and how do we get better at listening to that voice? My professional role outside of the Birrarung Council is I'm a landscape architect, so I'm trained to think about place and land and country and people's relationship to it. One of the reasons I wanted to be on the Birrarung Council is particularly I wanted to learn from traditional owners the things that I couldn't yet see in regards to the landscape that I live and work within. It's really interesting thinking about the language of the river from a landscape architect's perspective. I think the water is the obvious thing. And most people in the community recognise the water as the river. They recognise whether the water is healthy or not. You can pretty much ask anyone in the community, does this look polluted or not? And I think that there's a fairly high level of literacy around that. The other key thing is, though, that we're very conscious of is the river belongs to its lands. The river has formed these lands. And also the landscape and the ecology and the animals and the plants and the systems, the really complex systems that exist within these lands that have been made by the river. And I think that one of the key things that the community is not so literate about is understanding that landscape, and particularly the landscape in each place. So in Melbourne, what are the systems, what are the plants and animals, and what are the seasons and the cycles of that landscape that as non-Indigenous people we need to work better to recognise and to learn. And I think in the first instance, it's a real priority to learn what we can from the traditional owners. I've certainly learnt an immense amount from having yarns with Uncle Dave. He's an amazing wealth of knowledge, and also the other elders who I've had the privilege to listen to and work with on the council. Now I've just lost my train of thought. Sorry? Design Week. I'll just finish that thought first. Sorry, Erin. But I think we need to not just learn from the elders, but we also need to do the work for ourselves and spend time in the landscape, like Uncle Dave has said, walk on country and really understand what is that local landscape, how much have we changed, and what should we do to work back towards getting the things that we have destroyed and lost through our existence within that river's landscape. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is education, and that's been a really strong recurring theme about how do we educate the next generation, how do we educate the current generation. So through our advocacy role with the Birrarung Council, we talk a lot about, what is our role to help advocate for that change. And one of the key decisions we made, probably would have been late 2020, was that we wanted to facilitate a series of studios, that's the word, easy word. Series of design studios with some of the key design schools within Melbourne, asking them to think about the future of a place along the Yarra, so it's the North Bank in Richmond and Cremorne, and think about how they might redesign that place or reimagine that place through the Yarra River Protection Act, through the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung water policy and the traditional owner values, and also through the different policies and so forth that really have come through, and the Yarra strategic plan. So we had an amazing response. We had 4 different studio lecturers from 3 universities put up their hand to run design studios through the architecture and the landscape architecture school. The studios were really strongly led and participated through local Indigenous people and also really well supported through the Wurundjeri as well. And we had some really amazing outcomes through those studios, and it was really interesting to see the difference and the balance between the successful projects that came out of those studios and the projects that were less successful. It was really interesting to understand what might have been going through those students' minds, how had they engaged and how had they listened to the information that had been put to them for the project's briefing for the studios. So the projects that were unsuccessful pretty much just looked at the river and the river's edge and didn't really go beyond that and understand the responsibilities. And the really successful projects looked at how can we change our responsibility to the river from the river's edge back to the land. How do we really look at establishing our relationship to this place through seasons, through cultural rituals that really work with our modern way of living next to the river, and how do we really think about the river as a place that we really need to reconnect to. So I think that that's probably a fairly high-level summary, but I'll pass it back to Erin.
Okay, Thank you so much, Alex. I feel like we're rushing a little bit now because we're trying to stay on time, and I'm getting very strong time signals. The last thing we want to do, and I'm probably just going to give a quick summary of this, here in this fabulous Mitre 10 container is some water from the Birrarung. This was collected by Warwick with Uncle Dave, transported up here by Warwick in his car, and in that glass container is some smoke from a smoking ceremony. And you'll have seen a photo of Uncle Dave cycling through there with the fire. So Uncle Dave has infused the smoke from the manna gum leaves into that glass container. And what we're going to do now very quickly, Warwick, if you would like to do this now, is transfer some of that water from the Mitre 10 into that glass jar. The other thing that I would like to do, and we might do this possibly at the end of the day after we've heard from Dee Harding, we have a series of small containers. So we would like to offer a small number of you the opportunity to take some of this water back and share it with some of your rivers and your special places. So this is a communication between rivers. Rivers speak to each other every day through the medium of the ocean, through the medium of the rivers in the sky in the evaporative cycle. And what we're doing today is facilitating that communication directly. So if you'd like to come and grab a little piece to take back with you, we've got some small containers that you can take home. Please do not drink the water. As we've discussed, unfortunately, rivers are highly degraded. Yesterday, when we were out on the Parramatta, we've collected some water that we will be taking back and sharing with the Birrarung. So this is a cycle of communication that we are establishing and sharing, and that Parramatta water will go back to Uncle Dave, who can then release it back into the Birrarung. All right. That's right. And it's that physical recognition that the rivers are in fact connected. It's smelling? Oh my God.
Yes, it can. Wow.
It really does smell. We were worried that the scent of the manna gum was going to have faded, but it's not. It's really lovely and intense. So while they do that, I'm conscious of time. Leah, would you like to, we can move into the reading and then to Dee? All right. So the reading that we will have while that water's being transferred comes from a decision in 2016 from Colombia. And this was a case that was brought by local and Indigenous peoples to protect the Rio Atrato, the Atrato River in Colombia. And they were desperate to see this protection because the river was being horribly impacted by gold mining and various other activities that were happening along the river. And they felt that the government was not doing enough. So they raised a constitutional challenge because, particularly as Indigenous peoples, they had specific rights under the Constitution, and they were asking the government to uphold those rights. And the court held that it is necessary to adopt holistic approaches to conservation that consider the profound relationship between biological and cultural diversity. Considering the scope of protection of international treaties signed by Colombia, which preach the joint and interdependent protection, be human with nature and its resources, is that the court will declare the Atrato River is subject of rights that imply its protection, conservation, maintenance, and in this case, restoration. For the effective fulfilment of this declaration, the court will arrange for the Colombian state to exercise legal guardianship and representation of the rights of the river in conjunction with the ethnic communities that inhabit the Atrato River Basin in Choco. In this way, the Atrato River and its basin henceforth will be represented by a member of the plaintiff communities, these are the local and Indigenous communities, and a delegate of the Colombian state. Additionally, and with the purpose of ensuring the protection, recovery and due conservation of the river, both parties must design and set up a commission of Atrato River. And so in this case, again, you can see the echoes of the similarities between the Wanganui River, between what is happening with the Birrarung and in other parts of the world. And so with that, I think we'll try and bring up Dee Harding.
Hey there. And I'll just ask that that I'm able to be heard with clarity. Super, thank you. I think we've all learned that hand gestures are very vital in doing all these video calls without talking over the top of each other. I do a lot of these ones and these ones, so thank you. Good afternoon to everyone in Sydney on Eora and Gadigal territories. I'm zooming in this morning, my time. I'm in Italy, I'm in Venice, and so I can't be there with you all in person, but I offer my love and respect to all of those who have shared this morning and to the welcome and all the presenters and their families and their stories in their home territories. I'm going to begin by sharing a screen, and I'll read the small text that I wrote, which frames and encapsulates, it still holds very clearly my intentions for sharing this afternoon. So I'll share my screen and leave that on the screen and read from that, and then I'll go through and show some pictures and just give a very free-flowing conversation around why the work exists for the Sydney Biennale and how and who that came about via. Okay, it seems we are sharing screen. Very good. Let's do that. Okay, so reading from this small section that I wrote in response to the invitation is, it is important to me that Aboriginal families and communities have access to their cultural inheritances in the landscape as cultural heritage and in their continuation of their well-being in knowing and attending to our homeland estates. Having access to country and regular contact with the lands and waters are for the benefit of the people and place. My work for the 23rd Biennale of Sydney has been motivated by the interests of my family elders on Gunguli territory to renew their familiarity with the Mimosa Creek that has, in recent times, become dry and inaccessible because of fences and the structures of industry in central Queensland. So I'll scoot along here. This is an image of the work once it was installed. This is an opportunity to speak less about the artwork and the artistic processes, but perhaps to come back to, as I described, who and why the work exists via. But the work here is a repetitive action. It was intended to be the laying of intention and the repetitive action of walking back and forth down that cardboard wall, which was built by the technicians using water and acacia gum, which is known in the art world as gum arabic, because it comes from a North African origin of an acacia tree. But as I've described in the Biennale processes, there's around 1,400 varieties of acacias in Australia, plus all the additional botanical gums which are edible, have and continue to be used as chewing gum and can be water soluble for use as paint binder, just the same as gum arabic has been used in watercolour and historical painting across the planet. So I used gum arabic, water, and just my hands and the brush for applying the liquid to apply pressure and to eventually, I guess, kind of erode or carve or draw this illustration of an intention, but also perhaps a waterway into the cardboard at Barangaroo. So I go Bidjara via my mother and her father, but my mother's mother is a Gungulu woman, and so this is her territory here at Woorabinda. Gungulu is about 180 kilometres west of Rockhampton in central Queensland, and Gungulu sits at the Woorabinda sits at the basin of a range of river systems which flow through into the Fitzroy River. So there's actually, it's often a point of clarification that there's the Fitzroy River in the northwest, but also the Fitzroy or Tunaba, as the Darumbal people know it, and love the Tunaba River at the mouth at Rockhampton and at Yeppoon there that flows out into the ocean. So via Woorabinda and Gunguli territories, there's a major network of river systems that flow into Tunaba, and that all passes via the Rockhampton and Darumbal communities and out into the ocean. Woorabinda, might I just clarify that I've never lived in Woorabinda, but that is one of my family homes because it's Nana's territory and because she grew up there and still many of our family members are there. Woorabinda's, to me, one of my homes, although I've never lived there. So I will be very clear that I can't speak for the community, but what I can do is to indicate that my very strong relationship with my mother's brother, Milton Lawton, and his uncle, Uncle Stephen Kemp, and their extended family by the Leisha family. The Gungulu elderhood in Woorabinda, I still have a lot of contact there, particularly with Uncle Milton and Uncle Steve, to be able to have an understanding of what they want, what they need, and also just daily life, what they're up to So this is Woorabinda. Woorabinda describes the place where the kangaroo sat down. Woora being perhaps a doe kangaroo, and Binda meaning to sit. Here he is. This is my senior Gungaloo elder in the male line. Actually, one of my grandmother's sisters is still well and in great health, Nana Edna Ali. But also, this is Uncle Stephen Kemp. So this is my grandmother's cousin brother. So his father was a senior man there by the name of Mr. Tim Kemp. And Uncle Steve, he'd probably get a giggle out of this, but Google him. He's a little bit famous in the Rockhampton region and also by ABC. If you were to Google him, he's actually been quite prominent in laying down his perspectives, but also his father's perspectives there on that territory for a number of years. And in recent times, they've been highlighting the benefits of his medicine and his father's medicinal knowledge there on Gungaloo territory. So Uncle Steve is my touchstone as the most senior Gungaloo elder in Woorabinda. And he's been clear in the process the whole way through, and he's actually shared a lot of his intentions behind the artwork and why we're wanting to draw attention back to the Mimosa Creek there, which flows directly behind his house. If you jump over his back fence and maybe take about 20 paces, you could fall into the Mimosa Creek. And Uncle Steve has been describing over the years his father's knowledge. He was born it was 94 when he passed away, and he passed away in about 2010. So he had almost the turn of the 20th century in his perspective, Grandad Tim Kemp. And by Grandad Tim and Uncle Steve now, there is an immense amount of accumulated knowledge and experience around the land and water there at Gungaloo. And Grandad Tim had been relaying through a whole heap of information, which Uncle Steve is still looking to experience for himself, and some of it to verify or some of it to solidify so that he can then hold it and pass it forward. And some of the reasons why that is on Uncle Steve's agenda is that there are pastoral leases, there are barbed wire fences, and there are mining leases which have generated barriers for him to be able to just go and visit these places which he knows about in oral history. One of them that Uncle Steve asked me to speak about in this process with the Sydney Biennale is what was described as a barramundi hole. So similar that we heard about barramundi with one of the other gentlemen from up the northwest, Grandad Tim Kemp had described on his territory that there was a barramundi hole at a particular part of the Mimosa Creek. But Uncle Steve here now, as a young man now, a young elder, hasn't been able to access that site yet. He's had one conversation he's described with a pastoral landholder, and that conversation didn't go down the line of generosity that might have been afforded from my perspective. And so Uncle Steve still has a question about this story that his father's talked about there being a very lush barramundi hole on the Mimosa Creek. Uncle Steve has worked as the mayor in Woorabinda. He's a fully qualified mechanic. He's a bit of a bush scientist in the ways that his mechanical and sort of contemporary sort of experimental mind sees he applies the inherited knowledges in new ways which end up with new techniques. And some of those I've described over the years that they've flowed into my art practice, perhaps by the liquefaction of xanthorrhea grass tree resin. But Uncle Steve basically is a bit of a beautiful brain, and he's quite a prominent advocate for his territory there, and also his father's and his grandfather's knowledge on Gungaloo. This is my mother's brother, Milton Lawton. And so I offer images of the two men here now, these Garrett Marty, because these are my touch points. And the origins of the Sydney Biennale work for me come from listening to the conversations of these two men. Both of them have their own inheritance and their own interests. Uncle Milton actually is a Bidjara man, same way I go, by his father, but he's there on his mother's territory, contributing and offering his support to the efforts that would benefit his mother's story and the Woorabinda community, which he loves very dearly. So he goes a Bidjara way, and he speaks the language of on top of the Great Dividing Range. But there in Woorabinda, he's doing the work, I guess, on behalf of and living his life on behalf of his mother, a Gungaloo woman. So Uncle Steve and Uncle Milton are constantly in conversation with each other about what's possible, what could be done, and reinforcing, doing that perpetual thing of reinforcing, like we've heard today, shared themes and shared topics offered and re-offered in repetition. These two men have helped me to form some of my understanding there at Woorabinda and across the Gungaloo territories, but also in what I might want to do as an artist. This is just to indicate that on the 26th of January this year, those two men and I, Garrett Marty and I, and a dear friend of mine, Jan Oliver, were at Woorabinda making artworks that now I've brought over here into Europe. So this just indicates the 26th of January, that was me sitting with the Woorabinda red soil caked onto my hands with that acacia gum, applying that to wool felt. So the reason the artwork exists in the Sydney Biennale is that, as I described, there are those material and physical barriers for the Woorabinda community, particularly for Gungaloo people, to be able to have open and free access. And I mean free in terms of gates being unlocked, knowing that it's okay to climb a fence, but also being free in the understanding in yourself and in your family that this is okay for you. And if you feel it's your responsibility and if you feel it's good for you, then you're free to do that. So in terms of when I talk about free access to the Mimosa Creek and free access to country around Woorabinda, the first point of call for me is to point to those fences and those gates, and perhaps the pastoral leaseholders and the mining leaseholders as individuals and groups to be able to open those spaces out in conversation and generosity, but also the freedom to know that that's what you can do and you can ask for that. And so again, I'm offering this as an advocate because I have never lived in Woorabinda, but this is what I believe is going to be to the perpetual benefit of the community, because there are 52 language groups which have been now find their home in Woorabinda. I'll just backtrack slightly to say that Uncle Steve's father's father was one of the Gungaloo people who opened out that place when Woorabinda was established as an Aboriginal mission in 1927, when the Queensland government wanted to establish the mission. Uncle Steve's grandfather, Mr. Willie Kemp, Grandad Willie actually was one of the key Gungaloo people who opened that place out and said, you're all welcome here. You're welcome to come here and live here. You're welcome to nourish yourself. You're welcome to use the land, but also practice your culture so that you're safe and strong. So in Woorabinda, currently there are 52 different language groups on the small town block. And Mr. Kemp here, Uncle Steve's family have been central to that conversation in saying that all of the different cultural groups and language groups are safe and welcome to be there to practice their well-being. So this comes back to a rough map of the Mimosa Creek. One of the points that I've brought forward in the Biennale work is that I'll speak briefly about this and ask that if anyone has any interest, please have a look online. In the early 90s in Rockhampton on Darumble territory, about 180 k's to the east of Woorabinda, all the different family groups and cultural groups who were living in diaspora, who weren't able to live on their own territories at the time via economic reasons or simply being removed and not being able to access their own territories. There were a large number of elders and communities all living in Rockhampton who knew each other socially and were upholding their own relationships and their responsibilities to each other, but also to their homelands. And what happened was they established this grassroots organisation called the Fitzroy Basin Elders Committee. And Woorabinda and Gungaloo territory sits at the centre of the Fitzroy Basin with the Comet, the Mackenzie, the Dawson, the Brown River. Off to the top there goes the Nagoa River and then you start to get into a different watershed. But all of those major rivers that I named there flow into the Tunaba, the Fitzroy River, and come back to Rockhampton. So there was this large and interconnected community of elders who were living in Woorabinda on Darumble territory, where Tunaba was bringing their water to them, actually. So it's been described to me that Tunaba, their water was flowing to them and past them via Tunaba, and they organised on a grassroots level and set up the Fitzroy Basin Elders Committee. They spent a lot of time advocating for themselves and for each other and working with pastoral, but also with mining groups to ensure that their responsibilities could be upheld, but also to do that kind of education work is some of what I understand as well, to help inform landholders and to help inform mining companies that there are ways that they all knew which were beneficial to everyone. So the Fitzroy Basin Elders Committee was set up, and it's now no longer operating, but there's another organisation called the Fitzroy Basin Association has been set up, and it's a bit more of a what do we call that? Like a business kind of structure that offer advocacy and environmental consultancy. The Fitzroy Basin Association, in its current form, offered me this map, and there was a member who's of the community is interconnected with our families named Haley, who offered me this map to demonstrate the Mimosa Creek running from its watershed up in the top left. And the watershed up there starts on Blackdown Tableland. And Blackdown Tableland is a national park, which is at the heartland. They kind of call that the core or the heart of Woorabinda, of Gungaloo territory. It's a tableland that rises out of essentially the black and red soil volcanic plains as a sandstone platform. The Mimosa Creek begins up there and runs down through. And because the country is so rich and good, being that red and black volcanic soil, it turns out to be good for agricultural cropping and also for livestock. So that waterway has been, as you can see, capitalised upon by the agricultural plots which have been dropped there to the northwest of Woorabinda. And here we see Woorabinda down here and the couple of roads which run past. So I'll swing back to the fact that Uncle Steve and Uncle Milton were describing to me over and over and to each other, but also theorising about this idea that the Mimosa Creek has run dry, and it has been dry for a short while. And I say a short while because it's only been a couple of decades, but that's a long time in a young person's life. So the Mimosa Creek has run dry, and there are cultural stories around why that has taken place, and I'll leave that for Uncle Steve and the Woorabinda community to share that. So there's cultural reasons that are shared in the community for the running dry of the Mimosa Creek, but also there have been theories or conjecture about why the creek has run dry, and one of those was that there is a dam on the Mimosa Creek that someone upstream from Woorabinda, as we can see on the map, is damming the Mimosa Creek. That wasn't viable. That wasn't, what's the word? Plausible to Uncle Milton and Uncle Steve in the community, where there was some conjecture and theories that this was occurring. So one of the aims with the idea of doing a walk of the Mimosa Creek was to get up there and to have more contact and more familiarity, to either confirm or deny that there is a dam, and also to have access to see how the water's being used. So I'll skip back now to the initial statement, which reinforces all of that kind of intention. So it's important to me that Aboriginal families and communities have access to their cultural inheritances. So those two men have sought programs, but also just in sort of social grassroots activities, sought ways to load up the ute and to have people, particularly children from the community, sharing their time on country with them around, things like learning botanical knowledges, hunting and eating, learning the stories of how the animals live and their life cycles, but also just getting to get out and look and see. So to have access to their cultural inheritances in the landscape as cultural heritage, which we can leave for another conversation, but in terms of the rock art inheritances and also the material culture in the landscape, which agriculture and mining are constantly interfering with, my intention is that the families still have access to those in the landscape, but the continuation of their well-being is known. It's known and understood, particularly by Uncle Steve and Uncle Milton, that families having access to that creek and to their own country is to their own benefit as a community for the well-being and the spiritual and physical health of the community. So what we aimed to do originally with the artwork for the Biennale was to set up a walk, and we still have this as a distinct intention, but because of different raining scenarios and because of timing, we haven't yet sent parties of the community led by Uncle Milton on a walk up the Mimosa Creek. And the intention was that they would walk the creek and have their own time there and have their own space and resources to just have contact with the Mimosa Creek, and then to feedback any information that I might make an artwork in response to. And as I say, that the couple of the big different flooding events in central Queensland, but also just general timing for a good time of year being out of the heat seasons has meant that the walk is still to come. But that's, of course, perhaps how we might speak about contemporary art practice, that actually doing the walk is the artwork, and maybe I've been doing the planning as some of the preparatory studies. We haven't yet got to the walk. Uncle Steve and Uncle Milton are enormously grateful for the opportunity to receive the support and the assistance and the resources to go forward with the walk. But also I did hear from Uncle Steve after I gave the couple of floor talks at Barangaroo. Uncle Steve was grateful that the story is being told, and that particularly contemporary art audiences are getting access to his story and to the things that are important to him. He has described scenarios in the past where it's basically through cultural, cultural competency or cultural safety training with companies and organisations. He was described in the past that was pretty much the only format that he had an audience for someone to listen to him before. But actually via art practice over the last few years, Uncle Steve can see and is now able to recognise that we have audiences and we have friends who are interested in what his story is. And by making artworks, and by Jose and the curatorium, and by Leah and the team and all the efforts that are put into sharing the stories of why the artworks exist in some context, I can tell you that Uncle Steve Kemp up there at Woorabinda is now aware, because he's told me on a number of occasions, that contemporary art practice actually has more validity to him than he knew in the last few years, and that the opportunity to share his story via making artworks to friendly and receptive audiences is something that he has an interest in. So perhaps I'll leave it there and say thank you all for sharing today, and also thank you to Hannah Donnelly for the invitation and the support in making the artwork. I will try to stop share screen. Thank you so much.